All right, welcome back to Firewall. I'm your host, Bradley Tusk. My guest today is Andrew Chow. Andrew writes about tech for Time Magazine and has a great new book out called Cryptomania, Hype, Hope, and the Fall of FTX's billion-dollar fintech empire. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Bradley, it's so great to be here.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is sort of talk about this in the broader context. I think yes, you wrote a book specifically about this, but the reality is you understand this industry and its history and trajectory, I think, as well as anybody. So to kind of give the listeners a sense of your kind of macro take on the whole thing. So let's start at the beginning, which is, it has always seemed to me that there's sort of two crypto worlds that live simultaneously. And you may disagree with this premise, but there is the people who read the white paper and truly subscribe to the notion that central banks and central governments can't be trusted, and they would rather be part of a financial system on a blockchain that is disassociated with anything official. And I have to say, I've always found there to be almost a certain beauty to it. Like, I've respected it. It's not me, but I understood it and respected it. And then there are all the people who have jumped in on this, let's say since, 2016, 17, you'll know the year better than I will, who kind of now ride Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything else kind of up and down, more as an asset class as opposed to a currency, or even not even a currency, but just like an ideological stance in a lot of ways. Is that a fair way to describe it? Or like, when you think about the origins and how it kind of morphed, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great jumping off point because so many people think of crypto as one thing, one community, one one ideology. And actually, I think it's not just two. I think it's this weird hodgepodge of so many different people coming into the space for so many different reasons. And I think especially the period of this book, which is like what I call the pandemic era bull run, so late 2020, in those 2 years, so many different types of people started coming into the space and sort of jockeying for oxygen in crypto's big tent, like the most crazy Renaissance fair you could ever believe. Right. So if crypto started as this techno-utopian libertarian dream with really interesting, robust technological underpinnings, like the idea of the blockchain really interesting, I think my book sort of aimed to see how many different types of people with different aims came in, diluting those ideals.
So if you had to make like a pie chart,
sure.
How would you sort of say the true believers and then the other categories, and how would you describe each of them?
It's hard to break down into percentages, but I think one of the most interesting parts is, yes, this idea of Bitcoin coming out of the ashes of the 2008 financial crash, with the idea of how broken these central banks and these global financial systems are, to build a more streamlined, more resilient financial system. That's like the beginning of it, and especially as Bitcoin as a global currency, right? The idea that across the world we would be able to transact without middlemen from any country to another, without these, predatory, also without lenders and all of this. And then how the idea of Bitcoin as a currency, a lot of people just don't believe it anymore at all. They now,
and you think those are people that believed in it, that it would be an actual monetary form of goods, of exchanging goods and services, or more as a sort of ideological hedge against sort of institutions that they don't trust?
I think it was a brew. There was some on one side, some on the other. The idea of a hedge against inflation, against like seizures, all of that. I think right now in the space, it's really hard to tease out some of the motivations of the people who are deeply financially entwined and have so much money in it, and what they believe about the ideology and what they believe about, where their money is.
Right. Yes. So then FTX, which is, the book is both about, I think, crypto broadly and the underlying mentality of it, but then the specific story of this company.
Yes.
Where does it fit in? Like, where, when Sam and the team all first get going, and we all know sort of the Jane Street story and all of that, where are they in that spectrum of people in that crypto world? And then both, how do they evolve with crypto, and then how did crypto evolve with them?
So my book sort of traces this an arc starting with, like, generally the theme is like starting with the idealists and then morphing into the opportunists.
Exactly.
And I'm talking in the beginning of the book, the idealists are coming from technologists, they're coming from artists, because I'm coming at, actually, I started covering art and
like
entertainment
people,
first.
like, was your entry point into this all?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm talking about people who thought the blockchain would revolutionize just organizations with DAOs.
Right.
And people who...
by the way, just quick then, blockchain, it always seemed like for art provenance, which is not like a giant industry in of itself, but that it was like a really useful tool. Has it been used for that in any particularly helpful way? No. Okay. I didn't think so.
I think the promise, and we can get into this, the promise incredibly seductive and just made sense. Art provenance and the idea of building better art markets.
Yeah.
Because, visual art markets are so plagued by all sorts of other stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Laundering and all sorts
of
stuff.
Yeah, it's its own, well, it's funny, like crypto in a way, it's its own asset class that has all of its own schemes and frauds and ideologies and everything else, right? So you were based on that one, and then you came, so did this feel kind of somewhat familiar to you as a result?
I think so.
Yeah.
To loop back around your question. So the start of end of 2020, early 2021, filled with idealism, and I really follow Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, who has all these sorts of really heady, really complex ideas of how blockchain is going to revolutionize so many parts of society. And then you have Sam, and Sam was, I think, the most opportunist in the most craven sense.
As you call him, the leader of the degenerate wing.
Yes. One of the, like the king degenerate of this set. And it's really interesting because he was hiding behind this veneer of effective altruism, which is a totally separate thing of like crypto idealism. Now, there are a lot of people who think that Sam, after the fact, maybe was not a true effective altruist at all, or was hiding behind whatever this was. I think that he was genuinely believed in effective altruism for his ideals, specifically earn to give. So the idea that the more money he earned, the more money he could give away to
which is not
causes.
I have to say, like, what, just not even so much Sam, but just sort of the Will McCaskill theory around earn to give. Like, I remember before Sam managed to take down the entire effective altruism movement, I remember finding that compelling, right? Because, like, I think about my own life, and like, I've made contributions when I worked in government or things I've done as a volunteer, but the reality is the things I've had the biggest impact on are because I've made money in finance and politics and then given that away to things that work. So it's not a crazy concept.
No. There are a lot of people who are just totally ideologically against it. I'm not one of those people. I don't think Sam showed that EA was rotten at its core, but that maybe, when you push the values of a whole ideal to its like most extreme violent ends, bad things can happen.
Yeah.
So basically, Sam learns about earn to give from Will McCaskill. The idea that, if he makes the most money, if he basically just goes to, because Sam was thinking about becoming a journalist or working for a nonprofit for animal welfare. And then he meets Will, and Will is like, no, you should go to Wall Street. You should make a ton of money. You should give it all away. And that was very compelling to him. The next level up was the idea of risk neutrality that Sam embraces to the max. So the idea that you can probably define it better than me, but whenever you make a trade, you should, if it's ever it's plus EV, if the expected value is positive,
right,
you're going to plow money into the trade.
Yeah, and by the way, this popped up in some article yesterday where Sam had this idea of paying Donald Trump $5 billion not to run. Now, the reality is Sam was so naive politically that Trump would have taken the money and run anyway. But let's say that had actually worked. It's like the EV is very positive on that, right? No question about it.
So he basically learned from this ideal of risk neutrality, just cram as much money, get as much leverage as possible, jam into trades that...
And this was sort of from learning from the Jane Street days?
Exactly.
Okay.
And he seems like he had a lot of success at that time, but he realized when he looked at the markets that the opportunities for arbitrage were immensely bigger in crypto than on Wall Street.
Because there was just such an information gap?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was this global market that was trading 24/7 at in different areas.
And all based completely on perception, right? Stocks
Yeah.
are based on perception, but like with some underlying numbers and statistics and whatever else, right?
You have these different microcultures of crypto that are exploding in these countries around the world, and he was like, wow, especially in Asia, the Japan ARB was very. He looked at it, he was like, wow.
And is that because of interest rates in Japan? What made the ARB in Japan so specifically opportunistic?
I think it was. I'm going to have to go back and look, but they were just valuing Bitcoin at it.
Right, but you could see how in that, given the trajectory of their economy over the past 25, 30 years, why crypto would be appealing, especially to younger people in Japan, right?
Yes.
It makes sense.
Yes. So he goes in not because, I had talked to people early in his life who basically thought, he was telling them that crypto didn't make any sense to him, that he just thought it was bullshit.
So where was he in terms of, let's compare him to the true believer from an ideological standpoint who's sort of anti-central banks. Sam's personality, is he more of a traditionalist? Is he more like that person? Are his sort of various challenges that he has mentally make it impossible to even try to categorize him?
I think on the scale of crypto idealism, he's close to zero.
Yeah.
I don't think he had very many underpinnings at all in that way. I think he saw a golden financial opportunity and was going to get in and then get as levered as possible.
He grew up in Stanford, which is like a massive part of the institution system, right? Yeah, he didn't grow up sort of as like living on a commune.
His dad was a tax law professor.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah.
And so as you said, crypto is so based on perception. He realizes this, and he realizes that if he can facilitate and push and augment that perception, that's also good for crypto.
Yep.
And so I think he's very savvy in the ways that he understands this and understands how his building of self-images and self-lionization is going to be really good for the space.
Yeah. So as he's sort of realizing all of this and launching FTX, this is probably an impossible question to answer, but where is the industry? But more importantly, let's say that he never showed up, right? He became a marine biologist or something. Like, does the direction of the whole crypto industry take a different turn, or was Sam inevitable and he was just the first person to become him?
There were a lot of sharks swimming in these waters, seeking to become a Sam-like figure. Especially in this time. So we're in late 2020, early 2021. There are all sorts of macro reasons for why crypto explodes.
Yeah, and can you quickly explain with both the pandemic and everything else why that moment was so unique?
So we're starting in late 2020, early 2021. The first thing you have to start with is interest rates. They are zero, and it's so much more advantageous for people who want to borrow money to do risky things with their money compared to your savings bonds to do experimental things. So that's the first thing. The second is just the pandemic. Okay, the stimulus checks. You have retail investors in the U.S. who just get a free $900 and above, who some of them are using to pay bills, and others are like, I want to make money from this money. They hear about crypto, they're going to
and they're home, they're bored, right? I got to imagine that's playing into it all.
So this is the other part, which is the cultural part that comes in. People are at home, they're bored, they're not going to concerts, they're not going to movies, they're looking for something for dopamine.
Yeah, and it becomes this, it's funny. So my kids are currently now 18 and 15. So my son at the time was, I don't know, let's call it roughly 11, right? And one of the ways that he kind of gets through COVID is he plays Fortnite with his friends constantly. And even though we're in isolation, he kind of is connected to them because he's on his headset and his PS4 at the time. I remember he walked into the kitchen and says to me, I just went to a Travis Scott concert. And I said, I didn't notice you leave the house. And he said, on Fortnite. But in his mind, he did, right? And I think that at that moment in time, the digital world and kind of an avatar-like world took on a different reality for people.
100%. And that had already been happening.
Yeah.
You know, the rise of Fortnite as like a social hub for young people, the idea that they would want to spend money on digital goods, it just makes intuitive sense to a lot of young people. That's where they're spending their time. That's where they're socializing.
Totally.
Over the pandemic, that idea just makes so much more sense. And the idea that we're going to be in the metaverse, you know, in these virtual worlds, and that we want to have, there should be some sort of scarcity inside these worlds, and that we should assign some sort of value to them. So that's when the idea of NFTs starts to take rise as this really powerful cultural force of people being like, okay, I'm spending all my time at home in virtual worlds. I'm getting joy and connection out of them. The idea of NFTs having value makes so much more sense. Bringing people together, looking at art, building communities, getting virtual land, spending time in like these worlds called Decentraland and Sandbox. So you have these macro forces that enables people to put more money into these volatile assets. You have just this cultural boredom of people being at home. And so this gives rise to this incredible bubble, economic and cultural bubble that was going to explode with or without Sam. Sam is basically not famous at all at the top of 2021. He's just one of these guys. And he basically sees it, and he's going to ride this bull run like a rocket ship by seeking media attention, by creating this image of himself as a major Democratic donor.
And is the goal for him, so like in politics, for example, the means achieves the goal, because the goal is attention, right? Running for office and governing is solely the facade for what they actually want, which is validation and affirmation. Other people will say that they use media to drive their underlying, marketing, sales, whatever it is, and usually to mix both people. But what do you think it was for him?
So at this point, Sam, going back to leverage, he's incredibly leveraged. And he's made a bet of billions and billions of dollars on the crypto market expanding and going up. What he needs to happen is crypto to come to mainstream, and for more people around the world to believe that crypto is powerful. So I think,
and he's thinking about it in that linear of a way, in your view.
In my view,
yes.
And mind you, this is billions of dollars borrowed directly from FTX customers.
Right.
People don't know this yet.
Right.
But he is making.
There's no world where he doesn't know what he's doing is illegal, right?
I think it's a mix of it's a sort of thing where he might tell his lieutenant, like, I don't want to know about this. But it would have been basically impossible for him to not understand what he was doing.
So I think it's really where we are is this moment happens. Sam opportunistically, to his credit in a way, spots it, says, okay, I have to broaden the market, and then he explodes onto the scene. So how does that happen? And when did you kind of notice something was awry?
So in the fall of 2021, Sam realizes, and I talked to his PR person a bunch about this. He before thought that like PR and like spending ad spend was a waste of time. But he realized like starting getting on the cover of magazines was this very powerful thing, because it was this snowball effect.
Massive ROI,
Yeah, where you get on one and that proves your worth to get you on another. And you build up this image in the press that helps you with VCs, and then VCs give you money, and then press gives you more money. And he just realized like, oh wow, if I'm just like omnipresent, I can just like build this empire where VCs just give me more and more money. Being anointed as Forbes' youngest or richest billionaire under 30 did amazing things to like allow VCs to plow even more money into FTX.
VC. Look, as a VC, like luckily we didn't do that, but like we're human, and you try to sort of shut out all these external factors and hype and just make decisions based on what you think is right. But look, unless you are a really late stage VC, anything the early side, a ton of it is qualitative, right? So like it would be impossible to not be influenced by all of that.
Yes. And then, Michael Lewis's book, Going Infinite, has some really interesting parts of like character of like how he came into these decisions. In the book, Sam was talking about, he didn't really understand why Tom Brady, like it meant something more to be endorsed by Tom Brady than like Eli Manning. He was like, to him, they were just both quarterbacks.
5 Super Bowl rings.
But he was like, he didn't really understand that, but he understood intuitively that people, there were certain things that got the mainstream attention and like stuck in people's minds in a certain way. So he did research. He was like, yeah, I don't know. There's some reason that slapping my name on a stadium and getting Tom Brady was going to have way more ROI than like a collection of smaller.
Because in some ways, and neither of us are psychologists or doctors, so to try to diagnose it, I've heard a million things people trying to diagnose, what does he have, autism, this, that. There's something about him that clearly was different than most people, and he saw the world, like you said, in a way that was a lot of stuff that we sort of fluidly and intuitively understand, to him was not clear. Is that ultimately an advantage because he's not bound by all the perceptions and is able to sort of realize things and then take next steps? Or was it a huge disadvantage because it's like he was like playing with one hand tied behind his back?
I think it was his fuel and then his downfall.
Okay.
I think it allowed him to, again, get on this rocket ship forward and see things that maybe others didn't. And then when it was all crashing down, he was so stubborn that his mindset was so fixed in that his calculations were correct. That's why we see even when we get to the trial, he pleads not guilty and is going to fight.
Do you think he believed he was not guilty?
My opinion is that I don't even think that it's like that matters to him. Like,
because he looked at it from an EA standpoint, and says the end justified the means, so who cares what the law says?
So he was a like radical utilitarian. His own mother called him a take no prisoners utilitarian. Yeah. And some people,
my mom calls me that sometimes too. Yeah.
Early people in his life told me like he has a unique ability to harm people even he cares about or that care about him if he thinks that is going to further his means. So I think some base idea of like, am I right? Or like a base level of morals
approaches it. The baseline is different.
The baseline is different. And even if he thinks like, oh, like I lied to people. Yeah. If he thinks that down the road that can be advantageous for humanity in his calculation, he's going to do that.
Okay. So let's revisit. So he is arrested, right? And everyone does have the opportunity to try to cut a deal and plead guilty, right? And presumably get a lower prison sentence than if you go to trial and lose. And he makes the choice to say, I want to go to trial. What do you think the sentence would have been if he had just on day one said, yeah, you're right, I'm guilty?
So he gets 25 years at the end. I think it may be closer to 10, I think.
So huge miscalculation.
25 is a big number for a financial, like a white collar crime.
Yeah.
It was clear from sitting at the trial, and I was there for the whole month with a lot of other great journalists.
Yeah.
The judge grew to absolutely despise him.
Yeah.
Because he felt that Sam was being impudent and kind of playing games and having.
And then they decide to make you the example. So I used to be the deputy governor of Illinois, and I worked for Rod Blagojevich, who got arrested and ended up with a 14-year jail sentence, which again, comparatively, was wildly disproportionate to what other politicians would get in similar situations. But having testified in both the trial and the retrial, I saw the same thing, which was the judge came to hate him so much that in the judge's head, when he was handing out the sentence, he's like, I got to make an example of this guy.
Yes.
And that like doubled the length of probably what it should have been.
Yeah. I think there was that aspect of it. But it's interesting because you say, the calculation blew up in his face. It was the wrong decision. He would probably say he had made this calculation in his head that he knew there was some chance that he was going to be put away, but that the chance that he was going to walk free was going to be worth it. Because if in his mind, if he pleads guilty.
But you have to have some, like, was there ever a moment in the whole trial process where you thought maybe he'll win?
He thought that there was about a 50% chance there's like that he was flipping a coin, which also just shows like how parts of his mind just like don't understand.
But I'm sure
how
his
things
lawyers and actually David Mills, I know David, like David's a completely rational human being, right? They weren't telling him like generally speaking, just most people who go to trial lose, right? 90-something%. So like the math seems somewhat clear here.
He always, and this is going back to the like this unflappable belief in himself that he can talk his way out of any situation, that he can put on a great face for the New York Times and Forbes and Fortune and these VCs. He can do it in front of a jury, and I mean the fact that he chose to testify was another that it went disastrously and. It's like his lawyers sort of came out after and like they knew it was a bad idea.
Yeah.
He was so confident in his
do you think
ability.
they advised him against testifying and he insisted, and obviously he has the constitutional right to do so if he wants to. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think if he hadn't testified, the outcome would have been any different?
Maybe not, but I think the speed at which the jury, I mean, let's talk about this.
Fucking hated it.
It was they went in there. They ordered pizza. They finished their dinners, and then they came out and they voted.
Like before, like the DoorDash guy even got there. Like, let's just have our deal, but he's good.
I mean, you look at like Elizabeth Holmes. They took several days. These other cases. It usually takes a jury like this several days. It took 3 to 4 hours, and the faces that they were making at Sam inside the jury box. They're supposed to be totally stone-faced.
Right. I mean, they're human beings.
They're human beings. They did not like him because he came off as totally deceptive in a way that was just so easy to read.
So everyone flips on him very quickly, right? Which is, by the way, from a game theory standpoint, he should understand absolutely the rational thing to do, right? Did he understand it, or do you think he was surprised that people didn't stand by him?
He had built a culture of yes men there. He kept, his people from different stages of his life very close.
Yep.
He had also seen before how there was a schism in Alameda where people abandoned him, basically, where he was making riskier and riskier choices. There was a group that saw that and got increasingly worried about his mental health and the recklessness with which he was acting.
Yeah.
And demanded that he step down, and he cast them aside.
Yeah.
I think, Sam also emotionally, he's not really all there. And he had an ability to cast off people very quickly. So I don't he was very good at bringing people in, and then I don't think he was necessarily surprised because he didn't have those emotional bonds like that.
Do you think he'll read this book in jail?
I hope so. I mean, I don't think he's going to learn anything
and if he did, and if he invited you to have a conversation, I assume you'd go, right?
Oh, yes.
And then is your guess, knowing him, at least the way you understand him, he would say, here are 50 reasons why you're wrong about everything? Or would he be like, oh, yeah, turns out I agree about a lot of this?
He spent so much of his time talking to press in a way that he thought he could manipulate them. Yeah. There were all these...
A friend of mine from the Bloomberg world, Mark Botnick, I don't know if you dealt with Mark, but he was like dealt with his press guy, and it was like, oh, God, what a hard job Mark had, Poor Mark. I think he did the best he did.
Yes, I enjoyed working with Mark.
Yeah,
to the point that he was creating spreadsheets after, FTX went down the tube of like, which journalists can I call to tell my side of the story that will be sympathetic?
Did he ever call you?
He did not.
Yeah,
no.
he knew.
But I think, he was uniquely able to lie and create certain stories about himself. So, maybe I'll talk to him at a certain point. I'm not... I'm not like seeking a confession from him. I don't really think that's the way his mind works.
Right, but you would run like if he said let's meet, like you'd write an article. Time would be interested.
Of course,
sure. Can we zoom out? I've got like half a dozen macro crypto questions for you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So the first one, obviously, we're in an election. Kamala Harris named Tim Walz just like an hour ago as her VP candidate. Tell me if this sounds right to you or not, which would be if you look at sort of the triumvirate of Biden, then Harris, and Trump, you can't get worse if you're a crypto enthusiast than Biden, because Gary Gensler, whether he truly doesn't believe in crypto or whether he was just staking his entire future to Elizabeth Warren and just trying to make her happy at all times, she could recommend him for Treasury Secretary, has been as bad as you could possibly be, right? Trump obviously is courting the crypto vote. He made that really weird speech in Nashville last week at a crypto convention. Harris, do you have a sense of what her underlying views are on crypto? And if she just says, listen, I'm going to put my own SEC chair, if that's all she said, is that reassuring to the crypto community, or are they all in on Trump?
Harris is so interesting because she comes from Silicon Valley.
Right.
And the question of, her relationship with big tech is really nuanced, and it's still really unclear what direction she's facing. So, when she's AG of California, she gets a lot of criticism from the left for being very cozy, for not prosecuting this enormous moment of consolidation for Facebook and like these big tech powers that come to rise specifically in the mid 2010s. So there are a lot of alarm bells that are going off when she's named VP for Biden. 4 or 5 years ago, people thinking like, oh, this administration is going to be so big tech friendly. Obviously, that's not what happened with the appointment of Lena Khan.
Right. Opposite.
Yes, exactly.
In fact, yesterday, Google loses their case in court.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
So, obviously, then the question is, well, Veeps often, how much power do they really have to influence?
No, absent Dick Cheney, zero. Yeah.
Right. So, she's there. She's supporting Biden. She's supporting this overall, like, general antitrust direction.
Which is, by the way, if you're a crypto enthusiast, should be ideologically consistent with your worldview, right?
It's so, that part is so interesting too. But then you have the VCs who are powering a lot of the rhetoric from Silicon Valley, your A16Zs, who are kind of maybe aligned in both ways. Well, I don't know.
Right. No, Mark Andreessen was on the board of Facebook, right? And at the same time, he's one of the biggest crypto backers. But at the same time, Coinbase, for example, is big tech, right? And look, we were investors in Coinbase, but like, of course it's big tech. Right?
So this then goes back to your original question of like, how many camps are there in crypto? You have crypto versus big tech, and then you have crypto is big tech. Yeah. Right now, like, look, Coinbase is one of the biggest lobbying forces in the industry right now, and they have a different direction and goal than maybe some of the more idealistic.
Right. I mean, it seems, if I were Brian Armstrong or someone like this, it would seem to me that a reasonable perspective would be to say, listen, nobody wants things like fraudulent ICOs. That's no better. It's just as bad for me as anyone, because we're a legitimate business and we suffer when the overall credibility of the industry is damaged. But at the same time, we are an industry that doesn't have that much of a regulatory framework yet. And if we want to know whether or not we can lend on margin, like, you got to give us an answer, right? You can't just say like, we'll see what happens and maybe we'll indict you.
Yes.
So do you think that Harris can just say you'll be treated better than that, and then that's sort of enough? Or is that, I mean, I guess Andreessen and Horowitz have already said they were Trump, so they've already made that choice. But where do you think the rest of the kind of sector goes?
There was a report that actually Harris engaged with some members of, like, top members of the crypto industry about 2 weeks ago, sort of seeking an entreaty and seeing what they want. So the crypto industry right now is basically trying to use, from, again, my perspective, they're using Trump as a wedge to try to get more Democrats on board with pro-crypto regulation. They are trying to argue that there's this idea of the crypto voter, that there are some single issue crypto voters, and there are some that, like, somehow it's factoring in.
So here's the thing. So as there could be, right, I've thought about this a lot in my day job, but I don't think there is yet. So I think that, like, for example, like when we legalize Uber by mobilizing all of our customers, like, there are certain, in my experience, certain startups, certain sectors where your customers are passionate and you can mobilize them politically, and certain ones that you can't. And you may have a great business, but you're like some sort of SaaS provider, and it's like whatever, right? I think crypto is one where you absolutely could. And I think that in some ways they are organized now. Their voter participation rate is abysmal, right? If you can, I'm guessing, but if you could anyway do the math on it. But I do think that it is a community that could be organized. I don't know that anyone's really actually done it. Do you think anyone has?
There's an organization called Stand with Crypto that, have you heard of it? They started making a lot of noise this year and basically claiming to be a million strong crypto voters and it's sort of loosely attached to Coinbase, by the way, that they're going to mobilize grassroots support for pro-crypto candidates. They're recently in sort of their first FEC filing. About 98% of their money came from about 3 PACs. So as of now, there is not a grassroots donation campaign coming from crypto voters into this.
And what about, so that's true, but in theory, what your real, any sort of special interest, right, has like a couple of different weapons to scare politicians. One would be, at the best, most important would be votes itself, right? So if you're like a huge union like SEIU and you have millions of members, you're like, well, these people could all vote against you, right? Money, right? Some of which can come from grassroots, but a lot of it comes from the organizations and whatever it is, including dues in the case of unions. And then 3 would be sort of ability to impact kind of media, that kind of things like that, right? Even if the money was all coming from a handful of places, if Stand with Crypto could say, we've registered 200,000 people, that's potent.
For sure. And I think this is an open question that Democrats are really trying to figure out right now. Because Republicans have already cast their line as we think that crypto is going to be a great wedge issue and that there's people around the margins in swing states. This could be an issue. And we're going to stake, what's the harm? And I think Democrats are trying to figure this out right now because there are some Democrats that are like, we agree that there should be some sort of regulation and that this industry should want to expand. Now,
of the 6 or 7 swing states, if you just had to guess, there's very little data on this, obviously, but you said, okay, I believe the greatest percentage of crypto voters would be in this swing state. What would your guess be?
I have no idea for that one.
Yeah.
But I will say, and this ties back to SBF. So the crypto industry basically is they're all these pro-crypto people you don't understand. They're going to vote. They're pro-crypto and they don't like Gensler's war. And so they're going to be with us. To me, that underestimates, honestly, the distaste that a lot of everyday people have for crypto, who the whole SBF thing, whether they know the ins and outs in it, left sort of this deeply seated bad taste in their mouth. I was just in Texas, in this town called Granbury, reporting on this story of this Bitcoin mine. And, I hate the term everyday Americans or whatever, but they just have this sort of base revulsion and they don't understand crypto and they don't like it and they don't trust it. And they're deeply Republican. And I think there are a lot, there's certainly a giant contingent of people who like crypto, but I think there's also a base negative sort of gut reaction from a lot of crypto voters that is not really being talked about. And I'm very curious to see.
So you think there's as much risk as reward?
I think so, because just talking to your everyday, once you divorce yourself from the techier set, there are just people who are brother, they just don't.
I don't get it. Yeah. Okay. Next topic, blockchain. So as we were discussing, there's crypto, which is a blockchain-enabled protocol that, is an asset class and maybe a currency, depending on what it's used for and how you look at it. But then blockchain in of itself is not, crypto is relying on blockchain. Blockchain is not relying on crypto. Where has blockchain, for putting crypto aside, what are the use cases that have actually emerged where you think blockchain has been used in a meaningful way?
When anybody first hears about blockchain, and this was certainly the case for me, I was like, holy shit, this is an incredible bit of technology. This is well designed. It's its ideals are cool, and it's going to be pervasive everywhere. It's going to be this bedrock layer of the internet, basically. Totally. And so that's sort of where the book starts, of this big sexy idea of blockchain coming in to revolutionize everything. I went to ETH Denver 2022, sort of at the peak of the bull run. And basically every conversation was like, how are we going to slap blockchain on this?
Right.
How are we going to slap blockchain on that? Blockchain carbon credits, blockchain supply chains, blockchain governance systems in city councils.
Right.
There were all these like big ideas of how it was going to be this big disruptor. I don't know. Maybe you can point to things. Through my reporting, because my direction was like, all right, this is a cool tech. Let's write about the ways in which it's being used in really cool ways.
Right.
Swing and a miss, basically.
So,
every single time.
is there? Agree. I can't point to a lot of use cases either. Although in fintech for like kind of real time settlement and stuff like that, there may be some applications there. But do you think there's still a blockchain constituency independent of the crypto world? So yeah, maybe a lot of the projections haven't happened yet, but the technology still exists. It's still relatively new in the big scheme of things. And in 5 years or 10 years, it could be. Or do you think crypto is taking up all of the oxygen, and as a result, blockchain is sort of a casualty of it in a way?
Some people would argue that actually, like, the bubble is supposed to be really good for these more useful technologies because, the bubble comes, money comes in, and then you're funding the infrastructure.
Yep.
It is certainly possible. It's not something that we've seen, like, these core level applications really come to fruition and achieve mainstream adoption yet.
Yep.
Okay, a couple things. My book has a really global focus because I think crypto and blockchain make a lot more sense when you divorce it from America.
Yeah, it's funny. So that's 2 questions from now.
Okay. So the idea of stablecoins, which are basically a unit of currency that are pegged mostly to the US dollar, they don't make all that much sense in America because we already have the dollar, in my opinion. We have PayPal. We have like settlement systems that...
We effectively have a digital dollar.
Yes. They work. They're going to take a cut. I just paid, $2.06 for my coffee because, there's transaction fees. But it works and it's stable. In other places where there's rampant inflation, and a lot of my book actually, there's a big chunk takes place in Nigeria, where the naira has just been devalued to oblivion. Whereas stable coins make sense. There were people that were...
Well, El Salvador did.
Exactly.
So right. So it seems like there's 2 different economic theories of crypto that should be true, and yet I'm not sure are true, right? One is it should be counter-cyclical to the market, right? It should be a hedge. So, the other day, was it yesterday? When the Nikkei plunged and the Dow plunged, so did crypto. In theory, that shouldn't be the case. And then theory 2 would be in countries with rampant inflation in their currency, so Latin America, Africa, places like that, crypto might make sense as an actual currency because stablecoin takes a lot of the risk out of the system. And yet it doesn't seem like those things have happened. So why?
Yeah, the idea of Bitcoin as this like amazing hedge, particularly during times of turmoil, it was very persuasive for a while.
Yeah.
And actually, again, my book covers where there's sort of these times of localized turmoil. Bitcoin is useful. So we cover the Ukraine war. In the first weeks, Russia's invasion. Crypto was one of the few ways that you could get money in and out of the country. So a lot of donations of funding actually for the Ukraine military in the first week, they're coming in crypto, and people taking their money out of the Ukrainian currency, putting them into stable coins, arriving over the border in Romania, and then they have their life saved. That was very powerful. Same thing in Nigeria during the anti-SARS protests, where there's this military force that it seems to have been kidnapping and torturing civilians. When there were giant protests, the government was trying to confiscate all of the funds flowing in. They used crypto. It was very powerful. Then in the case of Ukraine, you saw how about 2 weeks after the other systems stabilized and you were able to get like money in through the banks and the NGOs were able to come in. But in these times of great upheaval, crypto did act as like a really persuasive hedge.
Yeah.
And then
it fills gaps in the banking system.
It fills gaps that like in times of acute crisis.
Right.
Then but ever basically since then, you've seen in terms of macro, Bitcoin is moving exactly like any volatile tech stock.
Yeah.
Actually, Joe Weisenthal tweeted yesterday that based on what happened yesterday, crypto looks like 3 tech stocks in a trench coat, which is what happened. It dropped 20% yesterday. It was the lowest drop basically since the whole FTX.
And is that because so many people who trade crypto are just kind of day traders who see it as an asset class, but don't see it as a ideological distinction, and therefore for it to be an effective hedge against the market, you have to sort of believe in crypto at the expense of other equities as opposed to as part of a basket of them?
I think that's correct. I think so much of crypto's like ballooning like market cap was these day traders and people who just treated it as like another
asset class.
Stock.
Yeah.
I mean, Bitcoin was the highest. It was like doing better than any stock in the S&P during its bull run.
Yeah.
And a lot of people saw that and they were like, all right, why don't I just like throw a little bit of my portfolio into Bitcoin because, diversified,
right.
like it makes sense. Those people are, during tremors, it doesn't make sense. They don't care about the underpinnings and they're going to get out. And because they make up such a big portion of the market, that's going to rock the market.
It makes it super volatile.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you see a world where ultimately, third world countries who have really unstable currencies are effectively using versions of stablecoin as their currency?
I'm not going to count it out.
Yeah.
I think based on what we've seen from El Salvador, that promise just failed to materialize at all. Yeah. I think a lot of these places where it's potentially the most useful are not necessarily the most tech literate places to begin with. So a lot of crypto people would be like, oh yeah, these countries, they're going to jump straight from Web 1 to Web 3. They don't have the right fintech infrastructure. They're going to jump all the way. Yeah. And that's a big leap to make. I know there are people in African countries in Nigeria that they find crypto useful, but the roller coaster is just so intense that a lot of times it's tough to pin a whole and yes, their financial system's already so broken that it's less intense for them. But then are you really then I guess your hope for humanity and this great financial system that it's better than the worst systems in the world seems to me yes, that's
possible.
It's
right?
a value
It's a low baseline,
but it's a low baseline.
Right.
Yes.
NFTs dead, just on hiatus. Where do you see the future of it going?
So again, I start my book coming from a cultural background. I'm writing about music. I'm writing about movies and art and stuff like that. And so many big crypto mavens during that era basically sold this dream of NFT art, that it was going to be so good for the art world and that it was going to be so good for culture. It's going to decentralize Mickey Mouse was one of the ways. What if you could own the next Mickey Mouse? Right. To me, it looked like NFTs were just the latest meme stock of the cycle for day traders to flip back and forth. So every cycle you have these, it was ICOs and the time before, and then it was NFTs. And now it's meme stocks. And people are just trading the meme stocks exactly the way they were NFTs, but without any of the cultural promises.
Right. It's interesting because you could look at NFTs in one of two ways, right? One would be the way you just described it. The other would be to say it's just something you can actually buy with crypto, right? So you have a currency that can't really be used as a currency in many cases, and therefore people are sitting with large amounts of value on paper and crypto. People like spending money, they like buying stuff. Here's something you can actually buy. From that perspective, is there a market and future for NFTs?
Sure, but it's it's self-reinforcing.
Yeah,
sort of.
And it, by the way, it could be at a fraction of the heights, right? Because it doesn't need to be right. If it's seen in a weird way as an asset class, then obviously people can talk themselves into any value they want. If it's just like a good or service, type thing, it's different. So yeah, maybe that's where there's a future for it. But again, even if there is, the people who heavily invested in NFT startups and all that are not going to see the yield on their investment, I think.
We always wonder whether culture is downstream from technology or leading and causing technology. I think it was a little bit of both during this bull run. There were a lot of people who, like the mainstream folks, who thought NFTs were cool, shiny, and like pretty cool, and so they came in, and that helped crypto. But I think it was also top down, and the industry players were like, "Oh, this is how we're going to get the mainstream in, and so we're going to apply money into it."
As a cultural critic, is there digital art that you think is good, that you just enjoy as a viewer?
100%. And early on, again in that early 2021 era, the digital art coming out of this space was amazing.
Right.
Because it was all these artists from around the world who had previously had no vehicle to show their works to the world, and were doing like awesome. And then because crypto is incentivized to show all the best stuff, there was like really amazing art. One of the main characters in my book is this Nigerian artist called Owo, who is like really, really cool and doing amazing mixed medium stuff. And one of the biggest NFT projects at the time was called Art Blocks, which are these artists who worked with code to generate these like amazing works. It had a bigger market cap than the Bored Ape Yacht Club that summer. It was a genuinely amazing phenomenon that was supporting artists in this really cool way. But the market figured out that it was a lot harder to trade this stuff than Bored Apes and profile pictures. And so it was sort of this race to the bottom to figure out like what actually moves like a shit coin. Like I don't need all this art stuff. Most of the investors, they didn't give a shit about the art. They just wanted something that could trade, that could jump, that they could just, like get in.
Is there a subculture of sort of digital art, like galleries that are still flourishing and showing this and everything like that?
There's actually an NFT gallery like about 2 blocks from here.
What's it called?
Oh, I don't remember.
All right, we'll find out. But you would recommend people checking it out?
I think it's pretty cool. I think, it's like this, there is I was going to say thriving subculture. I don't know if it's thriving anymore, but there's still events around the world where these NFT artists come. They're there to talk about the art, and like, it's sort of this weird, like, I don't know, the bird on the hippopotamus or whatever, of just like, they're there and they're doing cool stuff, but that's not the center of crypto at all. And basically, crypto has basically abandoned them except for throwing them a few bones once in a while.
Right. All right, last question. Effective altruism. Is it dead and buried, or do you think it sort of gets a revival after Sam sort of fades away a little bit?
That is one of the most other remarkable stories about this whole thing, is the way that all of the backlash against EA following... Sam was the most high-profile EA person to ever exist. He crashes. EA goes down the chute. But somehow, there were all these EA people sort of around what was happening with the rise of AI in Silicon Valley. And as AI booms... EA,
another life is there.
Another life is there, and there are all these people who are thinking about
who's the
AI
most prominent
risk.
AI, EI acolyte or proselytizer?
I mean, Will McCaskill is back. I wouldn't say he's the top, but Open Philanthropy is like immensely sort of influential in the thought space of how like all these AI builders are thinking about like the potential existential risks of AI. If you think about long-termism, these AI AI folks who are like, we don't want to care about
except because the one I would just say is, because that's the kind of thinking we engage in probably very speculatively on this podcast all the time, which is in a way, if from an EA mindset you could look at AI and try to either think about a framework for harm prevention or think about where there are the greatest sort of societal potential benefits. The only problem is, and I just see this as an investor, is like, it's all guesswork, right? Nobody fucking knows anything.
I agree.
In theory, it's sort of interesting, but like, I just don't know that there's enough grounding any of it to actually for anyone to make good choices in either direction.
So I totally agree. I think that there is this whole camp, again, of like Berkeley, Silicon Valley folks who are devoting all their time to like running these calculations of like existential risk that is based on I don't know what kind of calculations. And this is exactly what got Sam into trouble because he was running all these galaxy brain calculations in his head about the way that the next 5, 10, 50 years was going to work. And obviously there were some parts that he didn't see.
Well, and the funny thing is, in some ways, because they're so removed from the real world, like you want to write existential risk, what's the risk of a bioweapon in a lab that is as contagious as COVID, but significantly more deadly, leaking or being stolen or released, right? That's an existential risk that is real, present, and I think you can calculate to a certain extent, and then actually do things about, right? If you conclude like, okay, the security of our, whether it's the U.S. or China or whoever, that might be an area where all of the world leaders are sort of similarly incentivized to deal with it, right? Like that, some of these things are calculable. Like we have the existential risk of climate to a certain extent is calculable. The existential risk of nuclear proliferation to some extent is calculable. The existential risk of AI is just completely theoretical at this point, I think.
Yes, but there are a lot of EAs who don't think that, and they're working really hard. And I think they are in the ears of these labs like OpenAI and sort of shaping how they are thinking about AGI and risk and stuff. So that rebirth has been really interesting to watch. We're going to see where that bubble goes.
Yeah, so it will be interesting. Andrew, this was awesome. Thank you. Again, the book's Cryptomania, Hype, Hope, and the Fall of FTX's billion-dollar fintech empire. And how do people follow you generally?
I'm on Andrew R. Chow on Twitter.
There you go. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Firewall is recorded in my bookstore, P&T Knitwear, located at 180 Orchard Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We'd love to hear from you with questions, feedbacks, or idea for a guest. Just email me at bradley@firewall.media or find me on LinkedIn. And to keep up with what's on my mind and my latest writing, please follow my new Substack at bradleytusk.substack.com. Thanks again for listening.